Thanks so much for joining us again. And to those of you online, thanks for watching. We are in the final stretch of our afternoon. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a tech spotlight with John Mern now. John Mern is the CEO of Terra AI. Terra AI is a technology company focused on applying artificial intelligence to mineral extraction. John completed his PhD as a member of the Stanford Intelligent Systems Lab, where he researched intelligent decision-making systems for large-scale systems. He has spent 4 years applying these methods to critical resources in academia and now in industry. And it's been amazing to see in a short amount of time how much Terra AI has grown, with a pretty good shout out in the Wall Street Journal this past week. So John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
John, exploration is often cited as a critical bottleneck in mining. Why is exploration so challenging when we talk about minerals as much as we do?
Yeah, is this working? Test. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm glad to have this question because the sessions this morning focused a lot on risk, which is great. It's exactly where the conversation needs to be. But a lot of the talk around how we mitigate those risks was focused on surface risks. Offtake, processing, things that happen above the ground. The reality is that the risk below the subsurface is orders of magnitude higher than what we have below ground. Rio Tinto estimates it's 1 out of every 1 to 3,000 exploration projects will actually produce a mine. And the reason for it, and the reason why it's getting harder, is that things are getting deeper. If you look at the way we've developed critical deposits of industrial scale mines in the past, up until about 2010, almost every single industrial scale mine was discovered by surface expression, meaning the ore was actually poking out of the ground. You could see it on the surface. But from 2010 onward, the majority of industrial scale discoveries for metals like copper have been found entirely below ground. So what that means is that the explorer's job becomes both harder, slower, and more expensive. Now, couple that with the fact that in order to actually take a discovery to a mine, you have to be able to map exactly what and where your ore is. Now that is a process that means you have to be able to map out a complex 3D structure under a kilometer or more of rock. And as we've heard today, head grades at mines are getting lower, which means the production that we're having to exploit is getting lower and lower concentration. So that means you have to be able to map out ore bodies in more precise detail at lower grade, at bigger and greater and greater depths. All that means is that you have this kind of confluence of challenge. Things are getting deeper, they're getting harder to measure, but at the same time you need more precision in order to actually get your project across the line.
So we're talking a lot about minerals and how much we need of them for data centers and AI, but how do we use those technologies to address our kind of minerals vulnerabilities and finding these minerals?
Yeah, I think AI has the potential now to do for the mining industry what simulation did for the oil and gas industry in the past century. And that is take it from an industry and the exploration side in particular that is very human-driven, very intuition-driven, and very much in its sort of wildcatting phase, and bring it into a phase that is much more scientific, much more predictable, rigorous, and therefore lower risk. Every single exploration project that makes it to a mine has a model today that was drawn by hand by a geologist. Every single geological hypothesis was conceived by a team of people relatively from scratch. And what this means is that every project has a mountain of idiosyncratic risk and a lot of time has to go into it. What AI is fundamentally good at, and actually I'll just stop and just get on my high horse about AI here for a second. There's a lot of different types of AI here. There's the LLMs and the language models that everybody in this room has probably seen or even used, but there's a lot of domain-specific AI that's been built out in areas like biotech for drug discovery and other areas of AI for science. All of those different methods, what they are fundamentally good at is accumulating massive amounts of data and experience and processing them into a form that's easy to use for some downstream task. So for mining, what this means is we can take learnings from dozens and deposits across a continent and hundreds of or thousands of deposits across the world, put them into one spot so that all of these new explorations don't have to be started from scratch.
And how can AI-enabled exploration give the U.S. a competitive edge in expanding its mining capacity at a time when we're racing to do it, but the gap between us and our adversaries has grown?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why So there's been a lot of talk about processing and the processing dominance in countries like China. There's also, if you look further upstream, there's this tremendous competitive pressure on securing the mines of tomorrow, on securing exploration assets and things, new discoveries that will ultimately become the Escondidas and the Bingham Canyons of tomorrow. The Chinese are there now as well. They're buying assets earlier and earlier at riskier and riskier stages, because they're able to write off losses against their strategic line item that Western companies don't have. We can't just say, hey, look, we're going to lose $100 million on this deal. It's strategically important for the US, though, right? A small junior mining company can't afford to do that. So the way we use technology is by leveraging it as an offset against China and other adversaries that are able to take those strategic plays. To be successful in mining, in exploration, means being able to identify good projects earlier. If you can identify projects earlier, de-risk them, you can come in earlier, develop them faster, and ultimately open your mines sooner. What technology, and AI in particular, has the opportunity to provide the United States and Western countries is the ability to identify those good projects with more clarity sooner and kind of do the end run around that strategic play. So now it's not, hey, I'm a company and I have to have a strategic reason for taking this outsized risk investment. I have clarity and I can go into this asset with more clarity and the free market will follow behind me.
And should the US be taking a bigger bet on some of these technologies? I mean, it sounds like these innovative technologies are going to be really crucial to closing the gap.
Yes, but I think in a particular way. So obviously, we come from Silicon Valley. There's a rich VC culture out there that helps to finance projects and startups and technology development. What the US government can do that is unique is finance the deployment of these projects, the deployment of these technologies. I'll take the ARPA-E Mine of the Future project as a great example. As an early stage startup in a particularly slow industry in comparison to the speed that a lot of other Silicon Valley type companies typically move at, having the ability to generate results and to get your technology into the field faster can mean the difference between life or death as a company, but also life or death for that technology. So what the US government can and should be doing is taking bets on the deployment and commercialization of technologies. Follow the lead of Silicon Valley and the private investment community, come in then as well, that's great, but also do the thing that only uniquely the US government can and enable faster deployment, broader scale testing and evaluation, and a faster embrace of the technology throughout the industry. Being able to provide things like the Mine of the Future as a testing ground for companies, again, is a uniquely US government thing, and it's absolutely critical for technology companies that want to go from initial inception into scaling out in an industry that is traditionally not going to move fast enough to satisfy most VC investors.
Are you seeing that, are you seeing increased investor appetite for these technologies now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say overall the entire mentality within Silicon Valley and the larger technology ecosystem has changed quite a bit. I think it was Raheem or somebody else this morning that said there's been a very effective rebrand of mining into this critical minerals sector, and it truly has resonated and found it down to even our level, where a couple years ago, if I was trying to recruit somebody for a technology mining company, they would get really excited at first, and then I'd be kind of surprised, and they'd ask, well, is it Bitcoin or Litecoin? And the reality... And then when I told him, no, it's copper, it's nickel, no, thank you. Now, the fact that we are a mining company, we are an AI company doing something real, is actually one of the strongest selling points we have in both recruiting, investment, and talent. And it's because of the education into the industry of how critical things like copper and all these other various resources are to not only the rollout of AI, but every other critical initiative that people tend to care about. But it's also become a very real, kind of undeniable long-term play. VC investors are like anybody else. They're trying to make money. They are looking for a very typical returns profile, but at the same time, big funds like Coastal Ventures, like Andreessen Horowitz, are looking for a diversification into more durable deployment of AI and technology in general. So yeah, I would say overall that the appetite for investment into this space is growing, but at the same time, the amount of education that's required is is getting higher and higher. So the bar to be able to get an investment over the line is, and I think this is a good thing, higher than it was 4 or 5 years ago. But at the same time, there is more capital to be had.
Now, how do you think that this technology can be deployed both domestically but also abroad? I mean, so much, one of our big challenges we have with investing abroad is that they are underexplored, that we don't have good data. And so there's been a significant interest from global south countries in developing out their database of resource data. How do you see this technology fitting into that space?
Yeah, so I think you've seen a lot of countries, commit to investing in their mineral endowment through data collection. In Saudi Arabia, Zambia, many other countries have contracted large geophysical surveys to expand the entirety of the nation. So basically flying fleets of aircraft over the entire country to gather data to better quantify their mineral resource. Now, as we've seen here in the US, and we've seen now in Australia and other places that have digitized data collections, this is a great start. It drives interest and it drives investment into those assets that are easily identifiable from conventional signals. The reality is that even in these underexplored places, we are going to be needing to look deeper. We're going to need to get a clearer picture, and we're going to need to do that faster than we've ever had to do it before. So being able to couple discriminating technology, be it data and analytics and AI or a new sensor modality, in one of those offerings to a nation like Zambia, to say we're not only going to unlock an initial wave of investment and understanding in your country, but we're also going to be able to enable you and those companies that are going to come in and develop these assets to do it in a timeline that's years to decades faster, changes the equation for those countries and the partner companies as well. So overall, I think if I could summarize, deploy it in the undeployed areas, deploy it in the thoroughly explored areas, but make sure you do so in a way where you're going from data to intelligence as quickly as possible so that the companies and the countries that are developing it can act quickly.
I have 2 more questions. So we talk a lot about how the place that we have fallen behind is actually in processing. You hear it all the time, right? It's not necessarily in the geology, but it's where all of the minerals go. How do you see this innovation and what Silicon Valley is doing to change the kind of that midstream segment?
Well, I would argue that as soon as we fix the midstream, we're going to realize we're behind in the upstream as well. But no, I think it's the same story, right? There's an offset advantage here, a potential offset advantage that the U.S. can leverage in innovation and processing. In iron, for example, one of the biggest advantages that China has in producing iron is a very low cost of energy, and they have very large smelters that they can fire up and run for decades. There's a lot of innovation in how we swap out coal-fired, iron refining with hydrogen and electricity and things that we can produce abundantly here in the United States, natural gas, for example. That type of innovation is something that, again, the technology industry on its own can only take so far. It will require a level of state support to generate those early proof points and those early wins in order to get it to scale as rapidly as we need to. But in general, I think there's a lot of different ways that Silicon Valley and the larger technical ecosystem tend to innovate. They do it directly at the problem. They look at, hey, we have a high cost of energy for copper smelting, let's figure out technologies to reduce it. They also do it kind of tangentially by, for example, looking at new materials discoveries, looking at ways they can do supply chain forward design. Let's see if we can design a power grid that uses X percentage less copper. Let's see if we can develop a material from readily mission available resources that can replace some of the magnets as we've seen with BMW, for example. So ultimately in the midstream, I think we're going to see a large focus on energy reduction. We're going to see a large focus on CapEx reduction as 2 of the major focus points for technical innovation coming out of the ecosystem as it currently is.
And how can policymakers and other stakeholders help shape and accelerate innovation? Like, again, we all agree on where we need to go, but it's more of how do we get there? So what does support look like in terms of accelerating innovation?
Well, the fact that y'all know where we need to go is news to a lot of us in Silicon Valley. So I think if you look at the investments that are happening today, you're going to see that the reason that money is being put where it is not necessarily because it's the most strategically advantageous or the highest leverage toward any kind of centralized objective. One of the biggest, I'd say, hurdles to VC investments still is the timeline in this world. A fast mine, really fast, is 6 years. The typical return to portfolio is 7 years for VCs. So your investment has to return the portfolio amount in 7 years. So if we're saying we're going to get one shot on goal in that time, it's a really hard sell to VC industry. So the result is that projects are focusing on things like retrofitting, lower CapEx, processing replacement, things that are fast wins that aren't necessarily going to move the needle the most. So if you're a policymaker or somebody in this ecosystem and you want to influence the way Silicon Valley and other innovation sectors devote their work, I think it's helping to drive alignment on the economics. VCs, like every other investor, like I said, are economic beasts. It's not going to be enough to message policy or to provide pathways. It's going to have to be an alignment of the incentives. So that means helping to de-risk some of the earlier stage risks to better align the returns profile and ultimately timelines with what VCs are expecting. And it also means, again, de-frictioning some of the pathways for these bigger swings. So if we want to reinstate high capacity, high copper smelting capacity in the United States, and we want to make innovation a key tenet of that, there has to be a pathway for risk-seeking entrepreneurs to be able to go out there and test at the cycle speed and at the scale that is commensurate with most other VC investments. You have to remember that we're competing with hyperscalers that can hit 300 million revenue in 2 years. It's got to have a big outcome at the end of the day.
I'm going to ask you to ask me a question in a second. We have a few extra minutes. Senator Haggerty's on his way. What are some questions you wish you had clear answers from? Because Silicon Valley and Washington, and my little limited experience on the other coast, are very different worlds. Where do you feel like there could be better connections? What questions do you still feel are unanswered?
I think I'm going to sort of answer your question. There is a lack, I think, of general understanding of how things at the Silicon Valley scale, so thinking about it from the perspective of a new company or a VC fund, translate into the macro level objectives of Washington, and vice versa, I think. So I take, for example, innovation planning and innovation prioritization for mineral sector. It's not abundantly clear to anybody how innovation in something like exploration and acceleration there would impact the US's strategic priorities, and vice versa. So I would want to, maybe instead of saying ask a question, devote some work into understanding first off on our side, what is feasible to do? What can AI reasonably be expected to do in the next 3 to 5 years in this sector? And then on the other side, understand, if we were to solve these problems, what's the impact? If we know the impact there, and we know that it's feasible, we're very, very clever at making business models work. There's plenty of companies out there that enter a space that, with their technology and a conventional business model, would never, ever work. But if you are a PhD like me and you spent 6 or 7 years researching some type of hammer and there's no nails around, you'll figure out a way to make that screw into a nail. So yeah, I think there just has to be more of an alignment on the conversation between how the micro interacts with the macro, between the hill and the valley.
That's the most optimistic framing of a PhD I've heard in a while. If you don't have any nails, but you have the hammer for 7 years, what do you do?
Is that the question?
I was just repeating it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think, all right, so that's another point, though, here, is that I think on that same front, there's a downside to that as well, is that you have a lot of people that have hammers that aren't suitable for the problems they want to try to, that folks on the Hill and other places want to solve, but they will pitch it as if it is. This has been true nowhere more than in the AI boom. You have plenty of people that think that their plug-in to their favorite LLM is going to solve whatever AI problem it is out there. And they will spend a lot of time trying to convince potential customers and stakeholders that that's the case. So I think the other side of the coin of how does the US government, how do policymakers truly influence the course of technical development in a productive way is by educating themselves and building out the ability to be as good at diligencing this stuff as VCs, because VCs are going to diligence it from a completely different perspective. But at the same time, they need to bring that same rigor to it if they want to actually kind of move the needle on things that'll matter.
Are you feeling adventurous today?
Sure.
Great. Do we have any audience questions to either of us about things we've talked about today? We've got about 5 to 7 minutes before the senators here. So we thought we'd open it up to questions. Yes. Can you grab a mic and introduce yourself? There you go.
Thank you so much for this presentation. My name is Antonia Pup. I have a question regarding the framework that was launched by the Department of State, the Pax Silica, as a new tool of, we can say, minerals diplomacy. How do you think technological solutions like yours can benefit from these frameworks in order to make sure that this nexus AI and critical minerals really drive AI's America solution forward in the competition with China?
Yeah, great question. The reality is that we could do our job perfectly and a project can still fail for any number of extrinsic risks. And the reality is that our technology only matters if the projects that we're using to develop it succeed. So things that de-risk these extrinsic risks, be they geopolitical, financial, or otherwise, that ultimately help to leverage up the impact that our technology has, are critical to actually making sure that the value we are creating doesn't die in some middle ground, doesn't reach some valley of death and languish there. And I think vice versa, right? What we are ultimately trying to do is drive more clarity into the subsurface, and there's a lot of companies like us on the AI side, sensors, et cetera, that can be tools for helping to drive more understanding into the actual subsurface resources earlier, so helping to make the conversation around these things more informed.
Hi, I'm Aubrey Ruby. I'm senior advisor at the Atlantic Council, but outside of that, I am a GP at a fund, my own fund, and we invest in early stage seed round type projects globally. My question is to see if you can reflect on Silicon Valley structural finance and its application in the mining space, because yes, obviously with an AI tech play, when you're asset light, it makes sense. But some of my friends who've tried to raise along the rising tide and the sexiness of critical minerals have raised rounds, but for physical assets, like asset heavy type things. And now they utterly regret it. For valuation purposes, liquidity purposes, exit, all of that. So maybe just reflect on that, because there's a desire to marry Silicon Valley and the critical mineral space, but sometimes those structures don't match.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think if in some ways it makes sense, right? The returns profile from an exploration project is extremely similar to that of a VC project. You had, on average, 11x your capital if you come in at the early stage and leave at resource stage. And the risk profile is around the same, maybe a little bit worse on mineral side, but the lifetime is what breaks it. You have no signal, it's completely binary. You have nothing until you sell 5 to 12 years later. So the capital is completely mismatched, right? I think that putting VC dollars into the ground should be very sparing. And quite frankly, I think if you're investing in a technology play, which most VC mandates are to invest in underwrite technical risk, it would be very hard to convince me that an asset-heavy business model is the thing that lets you leverage your competitive advantage most, right? If you're going in there and saying, I'm going to develop every project from start to finish, I'm going to do all the undifferentiated lifting required to do that, if I was sitting on the other side of the table, VC-wise, I would say, why? Like, if you think your competitive advantage is in processing or in discovery or whatever else, do that. Focus on that. figure out the model that lets you lever that up as much as possible, rather than just following the kind of model that's handed there in the industry.
Integrated like MP and others, right? And then they can't raise money any other way at early stage, so it's really an interesting conundrum.
Anyone else?
You have a mic in the center.
All right, while I was waiting for that. The executive orders are requiring all the defense primes to, within the next couple of years, to be able to completely demonstrate that they have segregated their supply chains from China. What can AI do in terms of traceability in the mineral sector?
It's a hard one for me because AI is, like everything else, a tool, and the fundamental input to that tool is data. So there is a human layer to inputting AI into inputting data into whatever AI process you want to run to trace provenance of materials, for example. So I think it's ultimately, if I had to guess, and this is not my area of expertise, so this is a wild guess, is it's going to become a very useful tool for summarizing large amounts of text data, going through a lot of reports and things like that. But as far as actually ensuring the provenance of materials, my guess is it's still going to be a human-driven activity for the time being. Happy to be proven wrong on that, but it's, it reminds me of 5 or 6 years ago when every VC pitch was blockchain. And I heard, back when I was doing VC stuff at Stanford, I heard tons of pitches of blockchain to track this, blockchain to track that, and where the conversation always broke down was, well, who's going to put the info on the blockchain? Oh, I don't know. I think it'll be an accelerating and a force multiplier for whatever group has to do this. But I don't think it's a solution to the problem in and of itself, personally.
The question is for you, Grace, because you asked about what we heard all day today. And what I heard last Thursday, but I didn't hear so much about today, was anything about 45X. Sibanye-Stillwater mentioned it last week, and I think the South 32 mentioned tariffs. So this is not, a lot of this conversation was talking about early stage, but what I heard today is that the government is very focused on financing advanced stage, and how could we kind of level the playing field? It seems like maybe you could ask Senator Haggerty on the 45X and the tariffs as a means to help domestic mining companies and processing have 45X last longer and maybe address some of those tariff considerations to get some carve-outs.
I mean, I think that's a little bit more of a statement than a question. I think there's broad consensus that 45X should be extended. It's more of the timeline that we do it. Like anything, the earlier you do it, the more continuity and the more certainty you give industry, which is really, really important. Right now, we're looking at 2032, which isn't far away at all when you think about the mining sector at large. I think there's pretty strong consensus. It's just more of in the stack of priorities where it sits, given that's still 7 years away. But I don't think you find a lot of people disagreeing with the extension of 45X.
Yes, question regarding the appetite, the market opportunities for looking at the extraction of critical minerals, but from secondary sources, such as e-waste, industrial waste, wastewater treatment, red mud. Interested to hear also the role of AI for that, but also to accelerate innovation in that space and to accelerate the whole access to the critical minerals we are all looking for.
Yeah, no, great question. I think there's definitely appetite both for the process side. I've seen plenty of investments come through. A lot of the top tier sandhill firms focus specifically on different novel processing techniques, everything from recycling to tailings reprocessing and everything in between. Similarly with AI, one of the things that AI is very, very good at is also scaling up human reasoning to computer speeds. So what typically will happen in processing, let's even generalize this even further to just rare earths, right? If you've been in this space, you've probably heard the phrase rare earths aren't actually rare, right? They're just difficult to process. And one of the biggest sensitivities that folks have to rare earths projects is how long it's going to take them to stabilize their flow sheet. How long is it going to take them to tune and test and refine their refinement process to the point where they have a stable and predictable process flow. AI is being applied in all of these areas. It's being applied in the same way it's being applied to drug discovery and materials design. It's being applied to rapidly iterating on processing. And that's being applied both to the design of novel processing materials or processing processes for tailings and other non-traditional sources, but it's also being applied in very traditional sources as well to try to, again, just de-risk the early stages of production and refinement.
Hi, Tony Carroll with the Mining Indaba. Maybe this is a question that you could ask Senator Haggerty as well, Gracelyn. How do we get over the valley of death that you mentioned in terms of bringing things from design to functionality? And do you see any role of our 17 national laboratories in filling some of that gap? Because I think it's a natural resource that we don't often appreciate.
I'm happy to go for it, but...
Okay, we'll wrap up on this question.
Yeah, sounds good.
Because Tennessee has a very large national laboratory.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've talked with a few of the labs, and I know other folks have as well. I think the two things the labs have right now that are very unique and very underutilized are physical equipment, physical space, and data, and compute processing as well, for that matter. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks don't know it's there. They don't know to go ask it. I think that coming into with a very clear value proposition and de-frictioning a lot of the, quite frankly, pains of working with the government, even labs that are ostensibly designed to move fast and engage with industry. There's the Genesis project at DOE that was recently announced, which is a great example of something I really hope works out well, because its objective is to do just that, to drive alignment and to bring industry into collaborations to help commercialize meaningful solutions.
Thanks so much, and thanks for being a good sport about Q&A on the fly. I appreciate it. Please join me in giving John a round of applause.